Sometimes it comes very quietly. You are sitting somewhere in a room, looking out the window or at the wall, and suddenly you catch yourself in a strange feeling. It is as if you are remembering your life. Not a specific moment, not some particular event, but all of it at once. As a story, as a film, as something that already has a form, a plot, and a meaning. And in this memory you look coherent, consistent, understandable, as if everything had always gone exactly the way it was supposed to go, and almost never the way it actually did. We're used to thinking that memory is a warehouse, that somewhere inside us events, scenes, words, faces are neatly stored, and from time to time we simply take them out, like photographs from a drawer, like an archive, like proof that all of this really happened. But here is what is strange. If you look honestly, you begin to see memory is not a warehouse. It is a workshop, and in this workshop the past is not stored. It is constantly being remade there. You do not remember your life. You recreate it every time. You just do this for so long and so habitually that you stop noticing it. Try to remember any important moment. It does not matter whether it was good or bad. First love, a big mistake, a move, a quarrel, a victory, a humiliation. You do not see it as a raw, chaotic piece of reality. You see an already finished scene, with a beginning, with a middle, with an end, with a clear meaning. But at the moment when it was happening, there was nothing like that. There was noise. There was confusion. There were doubts. There were a lot of details that did not fit anywhere. There was the feeling that you did not understand at all what was going on. The plot appeared later, after the fact. And here the strangest part begins. Most of what you call your life exists only in this after-the-fact invented form. You do not live in what was. You live in how you later told it to yourself. And this story becomes more and more neat with each passing year. More and more logical. More and more unreal. You can notice this by one simple thing. Over the years, your memories become clearer and clearer, as if you remember them better. But in fact, you have just edited them better. You removed the unnecessary. You strengthened what seemed important. You corrected the motivations. You rewrote the causes. You turned chaos into a story. And now you believe in it. More than that, you live inside it. Because this story explains who you are. You say, I am like this because in childhood, or this always happens to me because back then, or I cannot be different because once. And you almost never ask yourself the question, was it really exactly like that? Or is it just a version that once seemed convenient to you many years ago? Here is what most people do not realize. Memory does not look for truth. It looks for meaning. And meaning is always simplification. Meaning is when out of 1,000 details, 3 remain. Meaning is when out of a complex process, one cause appears. Meaning is when out of a living and contradictory you, a clear character is made. And this character begins to live instead of you. You can notice this in the way you talk about yourself. You rarely say, this happened to me, then that, then something else strange and unclear. You say, I have always been like this. Or, I knew from childhood. Or, it was obvious that everything was leading to this. But in reality, almost nothing is ever obvious. Obviousness is a product of editing. We glue the past together so that it looks logical, because living in a world where everything happens without a script is too frightening. We need to believe that our life has a line, that it has a direction, that it has an explanation. And here a very quiet and very powerful illusion appears, the illusion that you have always been the person you are now. But if someone really showed you your life as it was lived, without editing, without selection, without highlighting important moments, you would most likely not recognize it. you would see a huge number of accidents, hesitations, contradictions, mistakes, random turns, decisions that you made almost blindly, and very little destiny, very little logic, very little "I always knew." But memory does something strange with this. It takes this chaos and turns it into a biography. And a biography is no longer life. It is a story. And here something truly strange begins. You start to live not only in the present, but also in this story about the past. You constantly check yourself against it. Who you are, what you can do, what is typical for you, what is not about you. And this story limits you greatly. Because if in your story you are the person who is always abandoned, then any difficult pause in a relationship begins to feel like confirmation of fate. If in your story you are the one who never succeeds, then any failure becomes not an event, but proof. If in your story you are cautious, not like others, not for this world, then you begin to live in such a way that this story continues. Not because you want to, but because it is more familiar that way. And here the most unpleasant truth appears. You do not just remember the past. You constantly use it so as not to change. Because the story about yourself is an anchor. It gives you the feeling that you know who you are. And the unknown is frightening. But here is what almost no one notices. This story is almost always false. Not in a crude sense, but in the sense of simplification. It throws away everything that does not fit into it. You do not remember hundreds of moments when you were different. You do not remember dozens of decisions that could have taken you in another direction. You do not remember how many times you doubted what you now consider your essence. Memory leaves only what supports the current version of you. And the older you get, the neater this version becomes. It becomes smooth, logical, complete, and less alive. There is another strange thing. We often think that trauma is what happened to us. But very often trauma is not the event itself. It is the story that we later began to tell about it. Two people can go through almost the same thing, and one, 10 years later, will say, "It broke me," and the other, "It made me stronger." And these stories will become part of their personalities. But where is the truth here? The truth is that the event happened, and everything else is interpretation. And this interpretation begins to live its own life. It begins to determine what you consider possible, what you are afraid of, where you do not go, what you do not even try. And you call this experience. But experience is not what happened. Experience is how you remember it. And you did not remember it the way it was. You remembered it the way you needed in order to somehow keep living. And there is something very human in that. But there is also a price. Because at some point you begin to live more in memory than in reality. You react not to what is happening now, but to what already happened once. You are afraid not of this person, but of the one he reminds you of. You avoid not this situation, but that old one that is somehow similar. You rejoice not at this success, but at what it proves in your story. The present becomes just a pretext to confirm the past. And here a feeling of being stuck appears, as if life is not moving, as if you are walking in circles. But in fact, you are not walking through life. You are walking through your own story. And this story does not tolerate change very well. Because if you change for real, it will stop working. You will have to rewrite the whole plot. And that is frightening. It is much safer to live in a familiar version of yourself, even if it is tight, even if it is painful, because it is understandable. And here we come to the quietest and strangest thought. Most of your life, as you remember it, is not what was. It is what came out after many years of inner editing. You do not live in the past. You live in a film about the past. And this film is constantly being res hot. But you do not notice it. Every time you remember something, you do not open an archive. You overwrite a file. You add new meaning. You remove old details. You shift the emphasis. And in 10 years you will remember this in a completely different way. Not because you are lying, but because memory is not a tool of truth. It is a tool of survival. It makes the past such that you can go on living with it. And here a very strange and very liberating question arises. What if you are not your story? What if you are not the character that memory so diligently maintains? What if you are much more alive, contradictory, and unfinished than any version you know about yourself? And what if most of what you consider your fate is just a very old interpretation? This does not mean that the past is not important. It means that it is much less definite than it seems, much less finished, much less of a sentence. And perhaps the quietest and most honest shift happens not when you let go of the past, but when you suddenly understand most of what you call your past is just a story, well edited, told many times, very convincing, but not necessarily final. And perhaps life is not the continuation of this story. Perhaps life is what sometimes, very carefully, tries to step beyond its limits.